Anyway,
Sweet,
who
man.
cares? That's
All
what I.
All right, consciousness. We've got it figured out this
I have
week.
another intro prepared.
Oh God.
You ready for it? Are we recording?
Yeah, we're recording.
Yeah.
All right.
We're going.
Here we go. You ready? Welcome to Plausible Deniability AMX with Antushka and Mr. X.
Boo.
I am special guest Brother X. This week we read David Chalmers, Facing Up to the Problem of Consciousness, and we will see if anything interesting emerges from the nonlinear process that is our dialogue as we try to make a conscious effort to stay on track. All right.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Nice.
Our mother will be so happy.
Is that it? Yeah. All right.
That's good. Do you write copy?
No.
Okay.
Wait, do you write copy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that?
We're already off track, guys.
Oh.
What? We're already off track. What's
Yeah.
that? Copywriting.
Oh.
That's where you write blurbs and stuff.
Oh,
Copy.
Including,
Right.
consciously staying on track, all that
Yeah,
nonlinear,
yeah.
adding little, Easter
Yeah,
eggs
exactly.
about the topic. and
Emergence, nonlinear.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You know, see?
It was nice. It was slick.
There you go.
Yeah, it was fine. Whatever, man. I like the disarray that we just kind of launch into it. We don't tell people what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll be.
Yeah, I asked at the beginning, should we do an intro? And it vetoed that right
Yes.
away.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, did I?
That's
I
the
didn't even
power
remember
of
doing that.
That's
Yeah,
the
you
power
did.
of being the older brother.
Well, that.
I don't ask, I just do.
Yeah. Well, that's funny because I feel like often I'm the one trying to offer up a summary.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know.
But that usually happens about 4 to 5 minutes into the podcast.
All right. Do you want to offer a summary?
After every casual listener has a...
Should I offer a
out.
summary now? I mean, basically,
Yeah.
I was kind of. I honestly, he got me back a little bit in the end, but I was kind of. I didn't really like him for most of reading this because I felt like he was
really?
arguing
That's funny.
against doing what he essentially it feels like doing. But yeah, basically he breaks down consciousness. He thinks most people aren't really looking at consciousness in a, I guess, categorically good way, and so he breaks down.
They're not facing up to the problem of consciousness.
Yeah, so he breaks it down into an easy and a hard problem. An easy problem, they're basically functional things that you can explain, and the hard problem is experience, essentially. And it's trying to understand what it is to be a bat, what it is to be an Antushka. Nobody, God only knows what that could be like. And so he does end up offering up basically the way he thinks that it should be gone about, which is basically, it seems like he's just saying you approach it like physicists do, where you have a fundamental principle, like consciousness is a fundamental thing like matter. And then you...
When he says consciousness, he's referring specifically to experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then he offers up basically a few principles that should be kind of the basic principles. So he has the principle of structural coherence and organizational invariance. So structural coherence is that you can map awareness and consciousness. Wherever you have consciousness, you have awareness. And then organizational invariance is that if you understand how something is patterned, essentially, a conscious, a being that has a certain experience, its pattern, if you were to put that pattern somewhere else and duplicate it, it would be the same experience. I don't know. That's sort of a clunky way of explaining it. We could talk about it.
I thought of it as like just sort of the principle that if we build it correctly, the lights will come on.
Well, and that it's invariant, so that that pattern is going to always create that experience.
Exactly.
Right. That was an important bit because he was talking about how there are other explanations of consciousness that tend to be physical explanations of consciousness, that there's tons of examples that they don't arrive at consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't conclude that they are the building blocks of consciousness when we can see that sometimes they don't make consciousness.
Right. And then the last part of what he did was the double aspect theory of information, which is basically saying information is important for consciousness and understanding it. But yeah, it's like, this is where it's like, okay, dude, you're just like falling into the same traps as other people, in my opinion.
Right.
But anyway, so it sounds like you guys liked it, though.
I like parts of it. There were definitely areas where I felt like he was saying more than he needed.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just because there were areas where I was kind of lost and he was going further into an explanation where I just was taking him at his word anyway, and the explanation didn't help me. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Antushka, what'd you think?
I thought it was all right.
Did you like it better than Penrose?
I think I agree with the first half quite a bit in terms of his refutations of other explanations of consciousness. It feels correct to me to say that a completely materialistic explanation of consciousness is going to miss something.
And yet he was going for a materialist, like his theories were materialist.
Right. Well, this is, I think you're right in that critique, in that he's still engaging with it as a scientist, which is sort of like at its root materialist in some way. And I feel like the problem is there's an entire philosophical body that is being ignored that has to do with spirituality and theology, and there's all of these other types of explanations that he kind of talks about and sort of dismisses. And I'm not saying that he should or shouldn't dismiss them. I think this is the problem with the way he's approaching it, is he has no method of dealing with anything like that. And so if his perspective is that the materialistic explanation is missing something, I think he's going to be stuck.
I guess I didn't see him getting hung up on materialistic or not, but reductive or not.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, the reductive is the materialist, I would say, in this sense, in the way he was talking about it. Because he was talking about how awareness, so you always have consciousness you always have awareness when you have consciousness. And then he was saying that's the key bridge to the functional processes. He brought it back to the functional processes.
The quote that I highlighted was, at the end of the day, the same criticism applies to any purely physical account of consciousness. For any physical process we specify, there will be an unanswered question. Why should this process give rise to experience? Given any such process, it is conceptually coherent that it could be instantiated in the absence of experience. It follows that no mere account of the physical process will tell us why experience arises. The emergence of experience goes beyond what can be derived from physical theory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean...
So does he... Would you say that he's crafting a non-physical theory?
Who you asking? Anybody.
The world. I'm asking.
Would you like
call him
would
up?
you like
Or get
to
him
ask
on the
Dr.
phone.
Chalmers?
Well, I was going to say...
I have him right here off camera.
It would have been good if we probably had, there wasn't time, but if we had read a more updated thing. Because, of course, this was 29 years ago that it was written or something like that. It was like 95 or something.
Woof.
I know. So, and I know he is, he's still an active academic. So, I wonder where he's at with his theory now. This was obviously, it's interesting because I don't think I heard about this from you, Brother X. Like, I heard about this independently. So it is obvious that he is a popular sort of academic. His theory is popular, rather.
I used to hear Sam Harris lay this whole thing out all the time.
Right.
Back when I was listening to him in like 2014.
Right. So there's obviously something compelling about it that people have latched on to. But in my opinion, it's like, I guess what he has done, which I'll agree, and I'll give him I think what people like about it is he has distilled the problem down. I guess that's the big maybe thing that he has brought. He's sort of tried to refine it so that it's like, because that's what he was talking about with the simple questions of consciousness are, as he calls them, functional, which are like the fact that we can relate certain brain waves to attention and stuff like that, and we know how you give somebody a specific type of drug and it will alter their state of consciousness. We at least know that, but we can't say what it is to be that. Like, we don't know what it is to experience red and all that stuff. And so, I agree with that. But I think, I think he even quotes Francis Crick, right, who, is a behemoth in the science field because he was one of the authors of the original paper that talked about the DNA double helix. And he had an interesting pivot in his career. He basically pivoted from molecular biology to consciousness research. I think he was at Salk and built that program up in San Diego or somewhere, maybe La Jolla. Yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. But even in the quote of Francis Crick, who's like, it's much harder to talk about what it is to be something. It's clear that people were still thinking about the, quote, hard problem, but we're sort of putting it aside because you almost can't address it until you, in my opinion, understand the physical sort of correlates. But
right. Or you can't address it scientifically.
Well, you can't address it scientifically until you build more basic physical correlates, which is what Francis Crick and his colleague were trying to do. And so in that sense,
right.
I feel like even though he is, he's not telling them that they're idiots or anything, but he's, obviously saying the downsides to these people's theory. I actually think that they have hit, like Francis Crick, Edelman, all these people that put forward more concrete theories about consciousness have done more for the field, which is, but that's just my opinion, man. I'll stop talking.
I guess one thing that's sort of hard to is maybe not worthwhile spending too much time on and speculating about, but like you said, this came out almost 30 years ago. I don't know what sort of the conversation was like back then. I'm not super tapped into the consciousness discourse. For me, reading this, though, compared to reading Penrose, who's going deep down the rabbit hole of different things, the one thing I really appreciated about this is that he did just sort of lay out kind of where our understanding is at with different things and trying to define the different elements of it. So, delineating awareness from consciousness. And then what I saw him doing at the end, because you're right, I think he would agree that he can't really address the emergent properties. He can't really address experience. I think he would agree with that. But I felt like he wasn't trying to, but he was trying to sort of lay out a framework for where our understanding needs to move towards.
To address experience. So, yeah. Yes. Yeah. No,
and,
I agree
maybe
with
that's
that.
not helpful because it is very, theoretical.
That's, I guess, this is, I'm bringing baggage to the conversation because this is my issue with, it's the great Jethro Tull quote from Thick as a Brick. The thinker and the doer, no allowance for the other, And I think that
Do you consider yourself a doer?
I see myself as a doer, I'll be honest. I'm an
What
experimentalist.
have you done?
And what's that? And I'm done.
I said, what have you done?
I haven't done anything, but I'm trying to do stuff. But but
I'm trying to do
but I am in the lab doing stuff. What I mean? Yeah.
I feel you. I get frustrated with things that are too rooted in philosophy because of how abstract they can get from reality.
Yes. I was just having a talk with my boss. We were having a 15-minute debate, and it just summed up to we just need to do the experiment and see what happens. Because we could sit here and theorize about it until the end of time. But, I don't know.
Right. Well, and I don't know. Again, maybe it would be interesting to see what his more recent work is like, or just some of his more in-depth work,
Yeah, and that's exactly, I agree.
This was a short kind of just,
yep.
I don't know, taster.
I completely agree. And so in that sense, I don't mean to come too hard on the man because he does also say, he's very, I would say, what I like about it is he talks about its limitations very candidly. And then also he also says how he talks about it in more depth in another paper that we should probably, if we really wanted to do due diligence, we would go read. And then, for all I know, the last 30 or 29 years, he has been doing experimental work. So I won't say that he's just a thinker, but
has he been? Because I think isn't he a philosopher?
I think he's a philosopher, but I'm just saying I give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's been doing. Maybe he's been working with people. I don't know.
Yeah.
Antushka is unimpressed. And Tushka's a thinker. No? Are you a doer?
I don't know.
I would think, I don't know. I'm trying to think about that too.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot to say.
Whatever, man. I hear you. I mean,
to be honest, it's like consciousness is confusing, sure. People who are purely physical run into some problems when trying to describe it. Yeah, that sounds right. I have kind of like a weird, complicated way of trying to describe it myself. Sure, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I feel...
That's what I kind of take away. It was like, to me, the problem with any the reason that consciousness conversations fall flat for me often is because, to me, there's no way to verify anything that's being said. Because to me, we talked about this before, consciousness is ill-defined, and I mean, you can define it as, consciousness is the series of neuronic processes in your brain. You could define it that way. And then, I don't know, is that interesting? That's sort of an artificial definition. All definitions are artificial to an extent. But it's just always unclear to me what it is we're getting at. Because to me, there's a sense that what we're getting at is something that we can't quite pin down. He's talking about experience. I have some notes where I say that actually I think more interesting than experience is will. The fact that we feel as if we can harness our energy and use it. And, we've had conversations before about will, about how only you can choose to do things. And, if somebody moves your arm, or if somebody hooks up an electrode to your brain, they're using outside energy to manipulate your energy. But only you can truly manipulate your energy, or something like that. That's like the Rose Wilder lane.
But you don't think will is in line with consciousness?
I'm saying maybe that is, to me, that is the most interesting aspect of consciousness, is will. Experience is significantly less interesting to me.
Is that because of how poorly defined it is?
Yeah, I think part of it is it feels so ephemeral that it's difficult to get a sense of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Talking about neurons is easy and potentially interesting. Talking about experience seems...
Well, that's...
even the suggestion that neurons lead to experience feels dubious. Like, maybe. And how do we know?
That's his whole point, is that there's a chasm between that. It's the Humean sort of chasm too. I mean, he attributed it to some other guy, Levine, in here, but really, that's what Hume was talking about, is what's the causal relation from one moment to the next, essentially. Mm-hmm. We have it's a leap of faith in a sense. So yeah, because I would say will seems to be part of this experience thing to, I guess, defend him. I would put the will question within the experience question, because it's like, it's the same question of what does it feel like to be able to move your body? That is a subjective experience that,
Right, subjectivity.
Well, the experience of having control over your actions and movements, that's
an experience, though. That's
an experience, right?
Yeah. So that's why I'm saying I think will is within that frame of experience. For me, the reason I keep coming back to consciousness is because I just feel like talking about it more directly is the way to solve all these issues that we've been talking about, of like political theory problems and stuff. Because I think this is the thing, is first off, understanding that, we all do experience things differently, and there are ways to get at that by just like, you give somebody something, an image, and you ask them what do they notice about it, and you'll get that. This is the whole Rorschach idea. It's like different people are going to see different things and that's what gave us a clue that we are all sort of interpreting things differently. But yeah, I mean, it's like we've talked about this. It's like I feel like you can't have a democratic system unless you have a conscious populace. It's like, whereas a monarchy is actually probably better for a people who have a suppressed consciousness. And I think consciousness can be, brought up and suppressed in people through language acquisition and whatnot. So yeah, but the reason I keep wanting to come back to consciousness is because I feel like whenever we're talking about things, and granted, I bring it back to that, you can always, like, I think everybody should be looking at it from this frame because it's the frame of everything. And so understanding...
Even Antushka?
What's that?
Even Antushka?
Especially Antushka.
Okay.
I've been yelling at Antushka about this for a while now, and he's tired of it. But yeah, I guess if you don't see that point, then...
I just don't know how to look at something from the frame of everything.
Well, it's like when we're talking about libertarianism, it's like asking the question of, well, how aware are the people? To be a libertarian, you kind of need to be very aware, in my opinion.
Of what?
Of yourself and your
You
surroundings.
don't need to be aware of everything.
Of yourself and your surroundings, which is what consciousness is, in my opinion.
Yeah, right, sure. To be a mushroom, you don't have to be super aware.
Well, because more things are going to be, you have to be planning more, because less things are done for you. Whereas in like a socialist economy, where it's like where I would say probably in that sort of system, you don't want conscious people. You know, because you kind of want just people who are going to do the tasks that are assigned to them by the committee that's in charge.
Conscious as in aware.
Yeah, and planning, essentially.
So here's where it's and planning.
Which is it's
so
all
like
yes.
It feels to me like when you say consciousness, you mean awareness, right?
Yeah, but this
like
is where I would say I disagree a little bit with him, where it's like, for me, awareness and experience, it really is all the same thing. And this is maybe where I push back against his trying to reduce it, although I understand it.
Well, he's just trying to like be able to use a word and have people understand what he means for the rest of the paper when he uses that specific word.
Which is obviously the way that you should do things.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is, for me, it's all built into consciousness. Awareness is aware. Because that's how I define consciousness: is awareness of oneself and one's surrounding. And he's essentially defining it the same way when he talks about, you know, the ability to report information, right? I mean, and to manipulate your environment and whatnot. I mean,
right, but zooming it always out to consciousness. If you're having a conversation about consciousness, this makes sense. But if you're having a conversation about libertarianism or socialism, you may or may not want to zoom it all the way out to awareness of everything. And you might want to talk about specifically, like, what you need the income tax rate to be at so that you can build a new community pool or something like that.
Well, yeah, you're going to be talking about specifics.
And while that does require awareness on the part of the planners.
Yes. Yeah, no. But
talking about it from the perspective of consciousness
you're doing a little bit of a
confusing.
straw man here. Because, yeah, I'm not saying that you should be talking about it at every point of the conversation. But I'm saying when addressing how are these systems going to work, you need to also address how conscious is the population going to be. That's kind of, I guess, what I'm saying. Because if you have an unconscious sort of population of people, and they're unconscious for whatever reason, I don't think libertarianism is going to work, because they're not going to have the volition and will, as you've said, to think of all the things that they need to be doing.
So
yeah.
I feel.
Hang on. I noticed that my thing stopped recording. So there's.
Do you know why that happens?
Because it's whenever time I jiggle my headphones, it does something. It triggers something in Logic, and then it shuts it off. I pulled away.
Okay.
So
all right. Sorry, Mark.
I feel like when you're using conscious and aware in this way, I feel like you're saying more. I feel like you're referring more to like how tapped in are the people to how society is running.
It's how aware are they of themselves, essentially. because that builds into, I mean, this is the problem. You're right. I'm not being very coherent, and part of it's because not that anybody
You drinking wine and coffee again?
Yes. Well, it's not even that. It's the fact that I've written about this. Not that any of you guys should have read it. So I'm kind of glossing to the conclusion of what it is. But, for me, consciousness brings into this idea of time. So planning and everything is fundamental to consciousness because you don't have a system. You're only in the moment if you're unconscious. And so planning is like, it's an intrinsic aspect of consciousness. So the more conscious you are, the more you're able to plan and project into the future and past. And that's why things like libertarianism, where you're going to need to think about more things on your own, are actually, you kind of need a highly conscious person. Just like if you want a democratic society where you want people to be thinking about where do they want society to go, you need them to be able to project into the future to do that.
So are you talking about people that are physically capable of this, or is this a skill that people develop?
It's a skill that people can develop. I think we're all capable, and it's bootstrapped by language, because language, and this is the other thing, is memory precedes consciousness.
So consciousness for you is more of a practice than a, I guess, result of how we function.
I think it's because neurons sort of are similar to muscles.
Because again, like what Chalmers is talking about is sort of the way we are constructed, right? Mm-hmm. Our brains, our bodies, the way the senses and the information processing happens. You have these things called awareness, right? Our body taking in information, storing it, categorizing it, referencing back to it, right? Awareness for him. And then you have consciousness, experience, right? The phenomenal component of those physical processes that emerges from it. What is it like to then experience those things? You're now talking about the
application, essentially.
A practice that people make.
I'm talking about
right?
the application because it was on the back of sort of like, why are we even talking about consciousness? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But you're right. I'm talking about the application in this sense.
You're talking about a separate thing entirely that we haven't defined yet, I feel like.
Yeah, because, again, we were...
That I'm still looking for.
Fair enough. Okay. I was addressing Antushka's comment about, like, I don't understand, that he doesn't get much out of the consciousness talks. And I guess I was trying to say why I think it's important to think about these things because of all the applications of them.
And so I think the mistake we made is consciousness keeps coming up in your discussions, and then we read something that's using the same word but actually talking about something different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, I don't think so, actually. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Is I think that...
All right.
I think
what I'm understanding, it sounds different, so I'm not understanding it yet.
Okay, well, that's fine. You're right. Yeah. I don't mean to take the conversation into my theory. It's just, we also said that it doesn't sound like Anthony has much left to say about it, so I don't know. Where do we go from here?
I don't have any problem with that. I'm just saying that I don't think I understand yet what you're talking about, and that's what I'm just trying to understand. That's all.
Okay.
And I think we're getting confused because we read about one thing and it's using the same word as what you had been trying to talk about with Antushka, but it was actually talking about something else. And so it's not actually connecting yet back to why you wanted to talk about consciousness.
Fair enough. I feel I addressed it, but I can try to be more clear. Experience, as he's talking about it, I think is the same thing as awareness. And he even says this when he talks about consciousness and awareness being coherently coupled. He said, like, that's the thing. That's why I think we're talking about the same thing. And I don't know how helpful. I understand why you're saying it's helpful to try to sort of reduce them, but in my head, it's sort of, in some cases, it confuses me. I think it muddles it up because it adds all these different words where, in many ways, these words are all getting at this central idea of experience. Consciousness is getting at this central idea of experience. Fine, he's clearly defined it. Good on him. But yeah, I think awareness is this experience question, and it's coming out. Experience is amplified by memory and language, because it's built off of that. Experience, in my head, at least, is built off of your sensations. Your sensations are what make your memory, because and so. Yeah, but you're right. I haven't been coherent about this.
I think that's probably right.
Yeah. Well, and this is the associationist philosophy. This is what Aristotle put it forth first, that, your mind is built off of the sensations, and, you take things in, you associate them in a variety of ways, and you build more complex thoughts.
And that's why each of our experience is different, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But language can enhance consciousness because it helps you remember things. You've got symbols, and you're able to sort of add another layer of association. So that's why I think, it's very clear that the more you read, the more you're able to project, I think. And when I say project now, I know basically out of the moment. It's like at some point we're able to we're not just like a momentary being, we're a being that can think about the past and the future, and I think these come off at the same time. And yeah, I don't know. So yeah.
So for you, what is the source of consciousness?
For me, I think it is actually this distance of information traveled.
The source is distance. The source is like
it's an
3
emergent
inches.
property. So this is one thing I felt like he didn't really address in the paper. He maybe talked about one person. And I mean, I think this is kind of what Francis Crick is getting at with his theory of oscillation. So Francis Crick had this theory that he talks about, where basically there's these high frequency oscillations, electrical oscillations in the brain. And it is interesting because we call them gamma waves. And when I've done EEG research, we sort of discard these. Like, we don't really, because a lot of what people think is this is just the noise. So a lot of the waves that you're looking at are below like 30 hertz, whereas he's talking about, I think he said 40 to 70 hertz,
something like that.
Yeah, and so a lot of people would just say this is noise from the instrument. But I think it's basically as you age, you prune your connections. You start off with you actually start off with more synaptic connections, and then you kind of prune them down into, I think, longer paths of information traveling. And as this sort of, as you could think, like, as the circuit increases into longer and longer, meaning like you have one neuron, it connects to another, and at some point there's going to be a neuron that connects back to that neuron. And as these sort of loops increase and increase, at some point I think that's where consciousness comes from, because I'm thinking about it in the same way as, like, if you run electricity over a wire, as you increase the distance that the electricity increases, you'll get a stronger and stronger magnet.
Eventually, you'll get something that's subjective, something that experiences.
Let me finish before you just, you get magnetism. That's how you get magnetism out of you. You have a coil of wire, and you run electricity on it, and then you get this emergent property of magnetism. So, and you see this idea of sort of increasing surface area, and then getting these more optimized processes all over the body, whether it's in the lung to increase surface area for getting more oxygen, and the gut. And yeah, it seems like that, for me, that's what it is. And it would make sense that the
length of those loops,
basically, yeah. And until it becomes one big loop, because if they're convoluted enough, yeah.
Does that correlate at all to the surface area of our brain, or is that a completely different thing? I don't know anything about our brain, so
no. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the surface area, it's tricky.
And maybe, I don't know if that's worth talking about. It's just you were talking about surface area of lungs, and it made me think about that.
Yeah, no. So I think it's more that it's not to say that your neurons aren't growing, but I think it's more that they are refining the pathways. So they have a ton of interconnectivity, and then over time, these pathways get pruned so that the distance that one impulse travels is maybe greater, whereas it's more sort of chaotic when there's more connections, because it's like each neuron is going to be connected to whatever, like potentially, like it can be as many as thousands if it's in the cerebellum, other neurons. But as these get pruned down, you have longer circuits because basically because the information is going through. I'm trying to just think how to describe this, but
Trying to explain it to dummies.
no. I mean, it's no. I don't think you're dumb. I think it's. I mean, I'm not. I could be completely off. This is just what I think.
Okay. It sounds. All right. I do have a question for you, and I don't know if you have a clear theory on this or not yet, but do you think there are? I don't know what the best way to say this, but like sort of different like levels of consciousness.
Yeah, I think it's continuous.
Okay. So I don't know if this relates at all, but when he's talking about the double aspect principle and, you know, this relation to information, he's talking about, you know, one unanswered question there is whether all information has a phenomenal aspect. And he's saying if it does, then experience, you know, is much more widespread than we have believed, as information is everywhere. This is counterintuitive at first, but on reflection, I think the position gains a certain plausibility and elegance. Where there's simple information processing, there's simple experience. Where there's complex information processing, there's complex experience. Right. So forget about maybe his terminology for a second.
No, yeah, I like that.
I mean, does that map onto your understanding at all, just in terms of like...
Yes.
Okay.
I like that sentence a lot, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Anyway, I'm sidetracking us. If
no, you're not. We're trying to connect. We're trying to understand consciousness better, and this article didn't help us, right? So,
well, I don't know. I mean, it just didn't seem like you guys had much to say about it. So I'm trying to steer the conversation towards something. Yeah.
Sure. Mm-hmm. That sentence also made me think back to when you were bringing up with what's his name, Hofstadter, and the sort of absurd conclusion of his theory that would result in numbers being conscious.
Yeah,
but it sounds like it's kind of in the same vein of just, you know, if you run something to its logical end of information, you know, being sort of the foundation from where consciousness emerges, then, you know, there are going to be these different degrees in everything, right? And maybe some things it's to a small enough degree that you wouldn't even recognize it as such at that point. I don't know, but if you say, like, what is it like to be a dry erase marker? I don't know. Like, would that have experience in this line of thinking? Is there an emergent experience from the properties
Or
of
what about a magnet?
a magnet?
maybe. I mean, that's
more complex than a dry erase marker.
Well, it feeds into a thing he was talking about, how you need to be able to have a verbal ability of some kind, an ability to communicate the experience too. And that was something he talks about. It's like we would have no. I mean, and this is the problem with when we're trying to figure out whether to pull the plug on somebody, you know, and like if they have no way to communicate. I mean, but the guy that wrote the Diving Bell and the Butterfly, the book, who had I think a pontine hemorrhage, basically a hemorrhage in the brainstem. He was non-communicative except for the ability to blink his eyes. And then he wrote a whole book that way. But like for all we would have known, he wasn't conscious and there was no experience to him.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we've talked about this many times where it's like, for all I know, you guys aren't conscious, and for all you guys know, I'm not conscious. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to go back to Penrose with his dialogue with the the robot, there was an element of the robot's experience which the robot wasn't willing to accept, that it had to take him at his word, right? And
yeah. And this is another reason why I think it's good to just talk about consciousness more, because it gets to, like, I feel like when people develop pathologies like sociopathies, it's when they start talking about like how nobody else is conscious and stuff like that, and then they start to look at them like objects. I mean, and you know, yeah. Anyway, I still find we talked about this a little bit, but you hear this a lot. Like NPC is the thing people are saying now. Non-player characters. I don't know, Brother X, have you heard this meme kind of thing?
no.
Well, there's just, I mean, again, and it sort of goes to the fact that you have like an elitist attitude in many people where they think like they have a heightened awareness and most people in the world are going through. And so they'll talk about like how, another thing where I don't even know where this bit of information came from, but how like very few people have a running dialogue in their head. And Antushka said he didn't, but I think he does.
Yeah,
I think didn't we kind of delve into this though, that you do?
I don't know, maybe. I don't feel like I do. It is not my experience that I do.
But like when you're sitting, you have
Mr. X, you have a running dialogue?
all the time, yeah.
I do too. Some people don't.
Narrating your life to yourself.
Well, but this is the thing, is maybe it's just that it's not a verbal thing. Like you don't have somebody saying like, you know.
Yeah.
But like you run through conversations in your head, don't you, Antushka?
I run through conversations out loud.
Oh.
But not in your head.
You have
Not
a running
really.
dialogue in your face.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, it's actually similar to my ear training was really hard for me in school too, because it's very hard for me to hear sounds, imagine sounds in my head, and so I have to manifest them.
Well, that was hard for me too.
It was hard for everybody.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, ear training's tough.
I don't know. I mean, some people have really good audiation.
True.
The hard problem of oral skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but like, and then, but does that mean that you're less conscious? And it's like, that's the thing, is where I don't think that's, you know, maybe that's what you said.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, let me ask you.
I would be into being less conscious.
Let me ask you this too, as it relates to like political systems, and you know, maybe there's some that require or benefit from a more conscious population. Is consciousness the way you're thinking about it, Mr. X? Is it like, I guess I'm just thinking like, there's a lot of times where I get frustrated with following politics.
Yeah.
But I like to think that I'm highly conscious about other things, if that makes sense. And maybe I'm not an ideal citizen in a democratic state if I feel apathy and, you know, or people who like don't follow issues and vote, or, you know, but maybe they're conscious about other things. And so I guess,
Yeah.
is there also sort of a direction to which you can apply your consciousness the way you're thinking about it, or am I talking about something different?
No, I mean, I think maybe if I'm understanding the question, what you're getting at is empathy, potentially.
Or apathy?
Well,
Attention is what I mean.
Attention.
Directing your attention.
But I guess I'd have to know what those other things are, because I'm thinking like one of the reasons that democracy, I think, you have to have a conscious population is because you need empathy, and I don't think empathy exists in an unconscious individual, because you can't, if there's no sense of yourself, you have nothing to, like, that's what empathy is treating somebody like yourself. So if you don't have a reference of yourself, then how can you treat somebody like that? And democracy, I think you need to be thinking about other people. I think so, because, well, let's see. I don't know. Maybe you don't. Does that sound like a...
Well, I think so. I think you're right. I mean, this is why I'm anti-democracy.
You don't want to think of... Yeah, right. And this is...
No, it's not that I don't want to think about other people. It's I don't want to rule other people, and I don't want other people ruling me.
Right.
But yeah, I think you do have to think about other people because it's your job to try and impose your will on others.
Right.
Well, I mean, technically, I would say you don't have to think about other people. You have to think about what decisions you want made and cast your vote accordingly, right?
Yeah, but this...
Right, but those decisions will always
And this
involve
is where...
I know, but you don't have to think about how they affect you.
You don't have
you can think
to.
about how they...
You don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
Sure.
You don't
Yeah,
have
that's
to.
true.
And this is my point, though, is I think effectively you should, though. If you have a democratic system, you should be thinking about other people because your things will affect other people. So that's like...
All right, so here's my very probing question to this. This is where I'm getting stuck.
Yeah.
And it's good if you get mad.
Yeah,
That's
that'll
fine.
drive up the views.
So the way we're talking about it right now, we haven't used the word consciousness in like 3 minutes.
Thank God.
What does that add to what we're talking about right now?
Because I'm talking about empathy.
Right, but the empathy is a great word.
And I told you how empathy relates to consciousness because you can't have empathy if you don't have consciousness.
But what I'm saying is, what does adding consciousness into what we just talked? Because what I actually felt was interesting is I feel like the conversation went really well for the last 3 minutes. We're talking about democracy and empathy.
That's just 'cause you like to
and
talk about
voting
politics.
and considering other people. And we didn't use the word consciousness. So I'm saying, what does it add?
I just told you.
Because I think it went better without
was
it,
telling
to be
you
honest.
What does consciousness
We
add?
were talking about empathy, right? And Hyde and I related that to consciousness and why you need a and actually I was talking about it. I was telling you why I think you need to be conscious because you need to be empathic for democracy to work effectively.
Right, but if you can say you need to be empathic for democracy to work correctly, to me that's the statement.
No, it's not the. It's
Conscious
not the,
is
no,
a step
it's not
removed.
the deepest statement because how are you empathic? You need to be conscious. So you're missing the point then, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that not make sense though? Consciousness.
It doesn't make sense
Is
to me.
the
I'm
base.
feeling like what consciousness
It
is
does
doing
make
is it's
sense to me.
obscuring
It
specifics.
does to you, Brother X.
It does. I mean,
Thank you.
we are brothers.
I know, but this is part of the issue. Is just sometimes I'm just like I don't know how to reach.
How do I reach these kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I have a scientific question for you,
Yeah.
brother, Mr. X.
Yeah, brother's fine.
Yeah. So when he's talking about the double aspect theory of information, he has that he goes into that hypothetical scenario of let me find it, like a system made of neurons and one made of silicon, and assuming that they both result in conscious experience.
Yeah.
And what happens if you kind of gradually replace the parts from one with the parts of the other. I know right now in modern medicine, we replace a lot of body parts with synthetic parts. Do we replace the brain, any pieces of the brain ever? We haven't ever done that, right?
Not like full lobes or anything. I mean, this is the whole revolution about Neuralink, Elon Musk company, and they've putting electrodes in to sort of close the gap, especially if you have a spinal injury, you can close the gap between, the brain, the cortical neurons in the brain, and then, the neurons in the spine. But in terms of putting in a whole temporal lobe, we're nowhere near that so far as I can tell. This is a big question of how I don't know if you could ever simulate somebody, because it's such a if in my opinion consciousness comes out of the brain, because it is such a chaotic, undetermined mapping of neurons, it would be really hard to completely simulate that, I think. Maybe we'll get there. But yeah, I don't know. So we probably shouldn't do Hofstadter next week. We should probably move on to other stuff.
Back to politics.
Yeah, maybe we should go back to politics.
No. Wait. Well, you don't want to do Hofstadter.
I don't. I just feel like we're going to get into the same way. I'm going to get offended because you're not seeing the point, and you know, and we'll be back here.
Yeah.
So maybe we should just read on. And I'm not saying that Brother X can't stay on. By the way, I think that you add a lot. So you're welcome, as far as I can tell, as long as you want to stay.
Added this great reading.
Well, and I think you are a good moderator.
I will say I'm in Miami next week.
Okay.
I think depending on the time, I could still do it, but it would be more complex for me to coordinate.
Okay. Yeah, well then, and I mean, so we could then move on to something else, and if you want to jump in again at some point, you know, you're welcome anytime. But yeah, I don't know. We got to,
all right.
Antushka and I have to talk about what to do going forward.
Yeah. I had kind of a crazy book I was thinking.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
Yeah. It's on the spread of influenza, how it spreads. It's a book by somebody who is questioning essentially whether or not influenza spreads. It's like communicable in the way that we think it is.
It's probably a terrain theory idea, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't read it.
Yeah.
But I heard about it a long time ago, and then I found it.
Yeah. I'd be down.
Yesterday.
I'd be down to do that.
I mean, it's kind of weird. It's sort of like an off-the-wall idea.
Yeah, and I mean, no, that's fun. I mean, I had talked about that Book of the Damned, which is kind of in the similar vein where it's talking about sort of phenomena that are outside of the sort of field that science has been able to explain. And it kind of gets into supernatural stuff, but it's not as crazy as that, because it's talking about how, like, hail, people thought hail didn't exist until, like, how could anything fall from the sky until, you know, people sort of investigated.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Where did they think it came from?
Well, they didn't think that. They thought all accounts were sort of fake, basically. I think that was the idea. And Lavoisier...
I mean, that's pretty funny.
I know, yeah. Well, that's why I think you actually probably would like to read this book. But I'd be down to do the influenza one next, because I've chosen the last few, I think. I guess you chose Hoppe.
I feel like the podcast is like breaking my brain, is what I think. Because I feel like the more we talk, the more I'm just like confused about the world.
I noticed that.
And I just like, every time I think about reading something new, I'm just like, it's not going to help.
Yeah.
It's going to make it worse.
Yeah.
Well,
this is where I agree with you that I'm not conscious, and I wish I was less conscious.
Well, so that gets to my point that reading more increases consciousness. But this is another reason I think people need to talk about consciousness, because this is the double-edged sword.
And this is where it's like, I think the thing is, I want out.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, and this is, but people, I think, shy away from consciousness because it brings all this doubt and anxiety and fear of ultimately death, because, you know, that's what, you know.
You're dredging up Antushka's existential dread.
I think this is why everybody has an issue with me, though, is because I am always, even though I'm not explicitly talking about consciousness, I think I'm probing people's awareness more than they're often comfortable. Our dad is a good example of this. I push Dad until
Father
he's like,
X.
Yeah, Father X, until he's like, dude, you know, and I get it. He's like, you know, and honestly, I think it helps to be less conscious towards the end of your life. I think actually Alzheimer's is kind of like, in some ways, a blessing, even though it's horrible for everybody around you. It's kind of a blessing for the person once it happens, because it's like I think you undergo a diminishment of consciousness because you're losing your memory, and then you're losing your awareness, and then you're not aware that you're about to die. Yeah, it's horrible. I'm not saying it's not a horrible disease.
That's kind of like saying death is a blessing.
Well, some people think, if you're a highly conscious being, for some people it is. I mean, look at Hemingway. I think Hemingway was highly conscious, and he decided, rather than be aware of his eventual demise, he was this strong man for all of his life, and then he realized he was disintegrating. I think that's the same thing happened with Robin Williams. You know, this is why they ended up committing suicide, in my opinion. Because I think depression, people say, well, they were depressed, and I say, well, that is basically hyperconsciousness. You're
Right.
hyper aware of yourself and existentialism and stuff like that.
Right.
And yes, no, I understand that, and I think I get it, Antushka. I get it. But I think everybody. I'm going to keep pushing on it because I think everybody, if they are more conscious, the flip side is barbarism, and yes,
He wants everybody to be as
I don't think
miserable
that's. I
as
don't
he
think that's the
is.
only flip side. I think you're turning me into a Christian by this podcast, which is part of why I don't like it. Because when I'm hearing
Yeah.
you, it's like what we've talked about. Like hyper consciousness. To me, it gets back to the narrative idea that God is the source of consciousness, which is why it disappears when you die. And yes, there can be some kind of electrical mechanism within you, but God is the thing that is 100% consciousness. Like God equals consciousness in a literal mathematical sense.
Yeah.
Which is like all awareness of all things at all times, blah, 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 right? Kind of a thing. And so the only thing that can handle being fully conscious is that. Humans cannot handle being fully conscious. And so there are a couple options. I don't think it's one flip side. There's suicide, right? There's death, there's oblivion, and then there is faith, which what I would call an active casting off of consciousness, or something like that.
Well, it's
Because the atheist movement, and I think I agree with this to an extent, says that faith is belief without evidence, or something like that. And I think that's a sort of a nasty way of putting it, but I think they're right, essentially. But it's a way of saying that I am going to choose to allow awareness to exist somewhere else. I'm going to choose to put my trust in the fact that the source of awareness is not me.
right. Yeah, no, I understand that. The reason I think that barbarism is ultimately where you would go if you diminish your awareness is because that's it's the risk, I should say, of. Now, it's not
Sure.
that everybody that's unaware is barbarous, but it's the animal state. So you're going to be more, controlled by your whims, the id, whatever Freud wants to
act
talk
on
about.
instinct, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because
Right.
that's what it is. And so this is ultimately what I'm trying to sort of put forward in the stuff that I'm writing about, is that it's the middle way is, I think, the best way. It's the Aristotle way. It's that you should be aware of awareness, but you should also be aware of, I know, but maybe not. I mean, I'm not saying
Everything in moderation.
I'm not even saying I'm a pinnacle of it, because it's like I think, or rather a good example of how to live, right? Because I've got all sorts of neuroses and stuff like that, and
He's drinking coffee and wine
I'm
at the
drinking
same
coffee
time.
and wine. I'm, a bachelor at 32. It's like, that's the thing, though, is I think this is my issue in relationships, is I probe people's awareness too much.
Right.
I'm being completely
Because
honest.
awareness isn't the only. This is like where I keep arguing, is zooming out to awareness all the time. You're missing a lot of detail. It's not all awareness. That's not the only thing.
Well,
There is, in a sense, like God equals awareness.
Yes.
There is only awareness. Fine, but that's like saying that it's like the quote about, in order to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. That doesn't teach you how to make an apple pie at all.
well, it's the basis.
Like, yeah. So if the answer, how do you make an apple pie? Well, you
It's
need the
the
universe.
basis, exactly. It's the basis of everything. So, I'm trying to have it as a frame. I'm not saying that you have to always come down
Right.
to it, but I'm saying when people get confused, as I think often happens, I think it's important to remember, like, oh, well, maybe the democracy that we all like isn't working because we've diminished everybody's consciousness and have been trying to basically
Right.
come up with sleeping machines to just become automata that can be controlled. And so, of course, our democracy isn't working right now. And Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I'm saying. But I agree that there's a limit to it, and you can't always drag it back to that. But yeah. But yeah, I mean, this is what I'm right. I just wrote a thing about Dahmer, and I actually think people probably, it's a bit controversial.
Jeffrey?
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't really pushed it out.
No, Bill.
But, you know, the whole crux of it is this guy, I think the reason that he ended up doing the things that he did was he was diminishing his consciousness at an early age, and he was doing it with alcohol, which is...
Should we read that next?
Yeah, we should read, yeah.
I'm only half joking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would be good to have feedback on it, because I think...
I think the problem is similar to what Chalmers was saying, is maybe that's why that worked for him, but there's a lot of people who diminish their consciousness with alcohol who don't.
Well, I talk about other things, yes.
Who only kill 2 or 3 people, you know.
Yeah, and I talk about other factors that could have done it, gone into it. I mean, he was a highly closeted sort of homosexual, and I think that adds all sorts of issues. He had a horrible sort of, not a horrible life at home, but his parents were always arguing, and he was kind of neglected. It's funny, I actually bring this up. It's like he would... Anyway, I won't say that on the podcast. But...
What? Aw. You always do that.
It's just funny, because Brother X is known in our family for sort of putting everything down, and so you gotta, like, you know, nobody really knows what's going on in Brother X's head. And it was the same thing and he has this famous quote. When he was a kid, my dad asked, what was it? It was like he was at a Boy Scouts. You were at a Boy Scouts meeting. They were talking about like the pedophilia stuff or something like that. I don't know.
Talking about child abductions or...
Yeah, and then Dad asks you afterwards, like, how you doing? And you're like, I just think happy thoughts. And so, you know, it's just like...
I was trying to lower my consciousness.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and... yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that's a little bit different, but it's just the idea that you've got people that get lost in their thoughts, don't tell anybody about anything that's going on, and this is where like the psychotherapy came in of like sometimes you should bring things to a front, but there is a limit to that too, because if you start talking about something over and over again, you have the propensity to embed that into your mind because of how association works. But you also need to, but by bringing it to the front and talking about it, you become more aware of it, and you can potentially, you know, have executive control over it. And so Dahmer was drinking heavily, like beginning when he was like 15, and then he was also doing all these dissections in the backyard of animals, like roadkill that he found, and so I think a combination of like that. And then he was also just hypersexual because he didn't have any outlet. So he was masturbating a lot, you know, and not that every, 15-year-old isn't doing that, but you know what I mean? If you start associating this, and then you're also with dissections, and then you're also drunk, it's like you don't know how all these things are associating, is kind of the point. Whereas if you're...
Do you believe that there are things intrinsic to people's...
We've talked about this a little bit.
Biological, like things that are intrinsic biologically to people, proclivities, things like that.
I think to a degree, yes, but I think we've talked about this in the Foucault episode. It's difficult to say because it's also the fact that the earlier a habit forms, the harder it is to break.
Right.
And so, I mean, we were talking about this controversial point, though, in the Foucault episode on sexuality.
Because people with a lot of people who have children will talk about how...
Born this way.
Actually, once you've had more than one child, which I have not, so I'm not speaking from experience, you realize that your parenting and their experiences have way less to do with their behaviors and personalities than most people would think. And as far as I understand, a lot of sort of mainstream thought today is that, well, mainstream, I guess there's different, but that sort of the nature-nurture thing, nature is well over half of the story.
See, I just don't know how you quantify that, because I think also people aren't aware of how they're parenting as much as they think, and
they need to heighten their awareness.
Also, yes, exactly, And if you want me to use consciousness, I can use that instead. But I'm just know that I'm talking about consciousness here, Antushka. But
aren't you always?
And
you don't need to say it.
You had made that point about how
you can say, "How are you doing?" and I'd be like, "He's talking
you
about
had made that
consciousness,
point
bro."
about we haven't talked about consciousness for 3 minutes, and I'm just emphasizing we're still talking about it.
Right.
Also, understanding how negative, like people pick up on negative aspects, like especially kids, on like the things that you're not doing and how that's affecting.
Right.
And people might not connect that as much. But like I think about the three of us, and by that I mean me, Brother X, and our older sister.
And Sister X.
And Sister X. And how I actually feel like our personalities are very much sort of make sense when it's like our oldest sister is a very domineering presence, and I think Brother X's personality is a little bit more easygoing.
Quietly
domineering, yes. Domineering, but quietly so. And it makes sense they're closer in age. And then I came 7 years after her and 5 years after Brother X. And I think because of that, I was able to become more domineering also, and also in some sense a counterbalance to the domineering aspect. And whereas like you could say, oh, well, we're just intrinsically like that, or is it, I think the environment can perfectly explain these personality differences between us, even though we had the same parents.
I think in terms of how they quantify it has to do with twin studies and studies with adoptive children and things like that.
Of course.
Who take on traits of their parents even when adopted and with no relation to their parents.
Well, and that's the
you can also see it in, I mean, it's considered offensive, but you can see it in the breeding of animals too, dog breeding.
Yeah, I'm not saying that
and it's not like we're not animals.
It's not to say that genetics don't have anything to do with it, right? But we're talking about very multifactorial things, I think, like personality, sexuality, which I think, again, there's a degree of sexuality that is genetically determined. But I think also people don't think about the effect of habit as much in that. And I think it's also very clear that habit has an effect. And arousal and habit, I think, there's a clear sort of indication of how those are in line. And yeah, but I don't know if I want to go down this route again because it's controversial. But it's fine. We can. We've already done it. And there's the episode on Foucault where we talk about it. Because
wait, what did we talk about with Foucault? I don't remember.
You're gonna make me say it again. Because I cited a bunch of studies because I wanted to make sure, But there's very clear understanding of how like the amygdala and your arousal response essentially are connected and can be sort of programmed. And then we all talked about how, like, the idea of if you look at porn a lot, you sort of have to gradually look at more extreme porn if you're doing it a lot to get the same level of arousal, because it's ultimately based off of dopamine. And dopamine is habit. Habit is at the base of, dopamine is what programs habit.
I see very clearly that habit and behavior can shift throughout your life and can be set at an early age.
Yeah.
But to me, so this is my feeling, my lived experience of life, it feels like I've had my personality more or less my whole life. I haven't had any radical personality shifts.
Yes, I agree.
And, the story of when he was a kid, oh, I did it.
It's fine.
Brother X. We're going to have to bleep that. Brother X. I mean, it's a consistent personality trait, and so I understand what you're saying about how habits can be formed very early. It feels to me like there are things that seem unique to us that remain constant.
Yeah, and I agree. It's because it's the idea that your neurons are on a specific path when they're. But the moment you're born, that path has the ability to be affected by the environment.
I'm sure before you were born.
Well, yeah,
definitely before you were born. Because like
brain,
cortisol levels in the womb and all that.
Yeah, the moment. Yes, you're right. The moment that you become multicellular organism.
Maybe when you're a sperm still. Who knows? Have we done research that goes that far back?
Well, this is why some people think part of the autism increases is because people are having kids older.
Right. Yeah, you got those old sperm in there.
Yes.
Theo Von has a thing about the position you conceive in. It changes the personality.
But my point is that we're talking about complex things like personality, sexuality, whereas it's clear that there's a genetic component and there's a environmental component. All I'm trying to say is I think people should be more aware of the environmental component. And it's not to say.
Well, I think that the like social science story today is that it's all environmental, right?
I don't know if anybody would be that extreme.
Right.
Because I just don't see how anybody could ever be, because
well, you should talk to more postmodernists, but yes.
Well, yeah, but because it's the idea that it's like, yeah, obviously genetics has an important role because we come out and we're human and we're not, a dog, right? So there's there are pathways,
of course,
that we're.
I agree.
We're on,
I agree with you. I was just being.
Yeah, no, I know. But what is a dog? I guess Theo Von would say, or not Theo Von, Thaddeus Russell,
or Foucault. Yeah, what is the history of discourse on dogs versus humans?
Yeah, it's a good question. But no, I mean, but in terms of your personality, it's like your personality, I would say, is also a very large function of your environment too. I wouldn't be surprised if, just knowing a little bit about your family, I can see how you ended up this way.
Right. But to me, that's as easy a genetic argument as an environmental argument.
I don't know if
because knowing your family, those are the people you share genes with.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, and it's, again, I guess we're going back and forth here to say that I'm not ready to say that environment or genetics is a greater proportion. It's just I'm saying in terms of things that you can control and be aware of, environment is an important factor. So being aware of these things, I think, is good. But it's not to say that you could ever, like, this is why it's like the whole pray away the gay thing I don't think is true, because I think, it's clear that at a certain point, your sexuality is very set. Whether that's from
you can't pray it away anymore after 2 years old.
Well,
before then, you could be praying all day.
Well, and I don't think even if there is a component of sexuality that's programmed, I think that it would be too hard to disentangle because it's such a multivariable sort of thing.
Right, like prayer wouldn't be the way to do it.
No. Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't be. Although,
very rarely do I think that prayer is the way to do just about anything. Yeah.
That's because you're just an atheist.
I like personally. That you're holding some space that maybe.
No, never say never.
It's
everything
funny.
moderation.
I mean,
maybe to get a priest on your side or something.
Yeah. No, but it's just the idea that I'm trying to emphasize that early life is a very important time, and I think we don't realize how much we like our pathways are set from an early age, maybe the earliest, but this is what Freud's whole point was, right? Is that you can get stuck in certain stages of childhood. Like we've understood this, I think, even before Freud, that and this is why if you want a kid to be really good at piano, the earlier you get them playing piano, the better, right? Because they're going to, just remember it much better. This is why we all suck. That's why the three of us suck at guitar, because we didn't start
too
early
late.
Enough.
Yeah. Do you think we actually all suck at guitar? I don't think so.
I don't think we suck, but I think when you compare us to the people who are like that threshold, that plateau ahead of us, I think it's because those people started when they were really young.
I know tons of incredible guitar players who started at 14. Way better than me.
I'm talking technical shred festers.
Oh yeah. Matt Muehling, the guitar player for Kill Tony. He's the best guitar player I've ever met in my life.
Okay. And he started when he was 14?
Yeah. Okay. Same as us. So he started playing rock music. It's the same story.
All right. What excuse do we have?
Our pathways were set wrong.
Yeah, I mean, did he play piano before? I mean, that's the other sort of thing.
Could they be set in a way that would make him pick it up more
Yes,
intuitively
I mean,
without him having played it.
I think so.
Yeah.
And then you could say that's genetics. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he played an instrument of some kind and then picked
I
up.
don't know.
I mean, this is the whole thing with Van Halen. Van Halen picked up guitar when he was like 10, but he was playing piano and violin when he was like 5. You know,
Right.
so anyway,
We suck.
We suck. Thank you. That's all. We should be aware of how much we suck too.
Yes,
That's all my
we
point
should
is.
be aware. I'm in favor of more awareness.
That's funny. I am too, but yeah, no, again, I'm not, anyway, you could see Antushka and I are at a crossroads of how much longer we should do the podcast. I think
Sounds like you should read some sibling studies.
Ooh.
That's what I think you should read.
Why?
To learn about nature versus nurture.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, could be.
You're like, in your mind, you're like,
Well, there's a lot of sibling studies. I guess it depends on what the question is.
I think we should start at the first one and then the second one.
Yeah. I mean, you look at there's these famous cases of kids who are like, quote, feral because some horrible thing in their early life, they didn't learn language. And
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
yeah, and then they sort of never are able to get it to the same way. And so, some of them are sort of able to, but there's examples there's one famous example, I can't remember her name.
Yeah, I don't remember either. I've read about it, though.
Yeah, whereas like she just never really got the ability to be communicative. So that shows how not like how sort of malleable our brains are. And yeah, I mean, and how getting them on the right pathway is important, especially if you want them to like know something like language. The earlier you teach them language, the better they'll be, and I think more conscious. Unfortunately, it's not to say that you can't be conscious without language, though, too, right? So I'll just put that in there.
Right.
Because there's non-verbal forms of language and stuff. I actually got this question from somebody who has like non-verbal autistic kids, right? But like there's studies showing how like even like the stemming that they'll do and stuff, that's like a form of communication. It's just, but if you're not aware of this kind of stuff, then you're going to miss it.
But from your perspective, they are less conscious, right?
I wouldn't go and say that, because it's like, how can I say how conscious you are? You know?
Right.
From
your perspective, a dog is less conscious than a human, right?
It appears to be, but I can't say that definitively.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I know I'm being slippery here. I'm being plausibly deniable here, but it's because it's like
you shouldn't have said that. But yeah,
what? Plausible.
It was yeah.
No,
it's fine.
I was joking, but it's true. It's like I just wouldn't come out and definitively say that, because this gets back to the point of like most of the way that we measure conscious is through the communicativity of them. But it's not to say that there's not a whole world going on inside that we're just not aware of, because they have no way of telling us about their experience.
Right.
To bring it back to what's his face. Anyway.
Good old what's his face.
Oh yeah. My favorite.
All right, well.
Yeah. So what are we going to read next week?
I don't know, man. You've got me all depressed about it. I'm now you've got me thinking we should just end it. I'll be honest.
Listen.
Because
Well, then we
I
definitely
don't
shouldn't
want to
end
be
it.
the one to have to constantly, like, tell you why I think that it's worth doing. If you don't think it is, then,
Wait, what are you talking? You talking about the podcast or
Yes,
consciousness?
I'm talking about the podcast.
You're gonna have to keep telling me about consciousness, because I don't buy it.
Yeah.
But you can. Well, I didn't. You don't have to tell me about the podcast.
I don't know.
I told you I like doing the podcast.
I know. So this is where
You don't believe me.
I
It's
don't.
great.
I don't, because I just feel like I've been dragging you along stuff, and So Antushka, and I'm glad that I wanted to sort of get this out. We talked, in private, and I felt like I was pissing Antushka off the last few weeks, but he said I wasn't. Maybe I wasn't. I don't know. Actually, Brother X, you're a good sort of indicator because you said you've been listening to the episodes. Did it sound like we were angry at each other? No. Okay. So maybe it's all in my head.
It didn't. It's all in your head.
Yeah. I don't know. Sorry. I could cut this out.
I think you were angry at me today.
I think he was angry at both of us
I was
for not understanding him.
Well, no, I was frustrated because you guys. I felt like you guys were like saying like I was getting us off topic.
No. I really wasn't understanding it, and I was trying to acknowledge the fact that I think I wasn't, because I was trying to understand it through the Chalmers framework. But
you're right.
It was different.
I'm a douche.
I had no problem with going down that track. I was just trying to get on the same page with you.
Then again, this is my baggage, and this is where I'm a hyper-aware, neurotic person. Is that also like the first episode we did together? That was kind of a big thing. You kept saying how I was diverting the thing to talk about something else. We were talking about what we were talking about, private property,
copyright,
and I wanted to talk about. I thought you wanted to talk about private property. And you're like, stop, steamroll. So I felt like it was happening again. So then I was getting defensive. So I do apologize. Yeah, I wasn't angry. I don't know. I'm just a crazy person, and I'm too sensitive. Yeah, but it's because I'm too aware. Maybe that's my issue. See?
Yeah.
Aware of some of the wrong things at the wrong times, I would say.
Yeah.
Keep doing the wine. Stop with the coffee. Try that.
I have been drinking more, I'll be honest. Alone, too. No.
Oh, no. Well, I was just joking.
No, this is Antushka has told me to do this, by the way, if anything happens.
No, wait a minute.
To drink alone?
Antushka told me to drink alone.
No, I did not.
Antushka, what did you tell him?
Yeah.
I didn't say anything of the sort.
This is good. I can cut this out if you want me to.
What?
The end.
I mean, it's up to you.
I don't care.
Anyway, I do want to keep doing the podcast.
Okay.
So don't say that I don't.
Okay.
I don't want to keep talking about consciousness, but we probably will, so it's fine.
Well, we won't talk about it in this depth. Brother X, I did mean that too. I think that you add a good component to the podcast. So if you want to come on more often, I'm okay with that. I don't know.
I'm happy to. I don't know if I could keep up with it every week the way you guys do, but what I really like about it is I don't know. It just gets me reading and thinking about different things, right. And then more so if I read it on my own, I don't think I go quite as in depth as if I'm talking about it with people.
Yeah, I mean that's what I get out of it too. Yeah,
I'm not going to learn or solve anything by doing it, but I find it interesting.
Yeah, No, and it's funny. I'm kind of with you, Antushka. Whereas like I felt like a lot of my opinions were much more solid before we started the podcast.
Right.
It's like I think that's actually a good thing.
Now you know how much you don't know.
Exactly.
You're more aware
of that. That's the crazy thing. Is I know there's a lot, but I don't even have a sense of the scope for how much I don't know. It feels. I'm sure it's
infinite. How much more aware you are at this point.
Oh my God, I hate it. I need some of that wine.
Well. Yeah. And it's interesting you're saying that I'm making you become a Christian, because I've also talked about how I feel like Christianity is leaning into consciousness because of like the confession. We should read the Antichrist, by the way. Nietzsche. I was actually listening to it on audiobook, and I think you would. I mean, you think he lays into the Jews and genealogy of morals?
Is it read by AI Nietzsche?
No, it's not, but it would be funny.
that would be great.
But no, it's all about how Christianity is this it's like a self-inflicting religion that sort of destroys itself. Yeah. He's very pro-Buddhism in it, actually.
Nice. Yeah, well, that's why he's the Antichrist.
Exactly.
We should all be more like the Buddha.
Yeah. Wait.
I'm also starting to believe that the sun is God, so...
Maybe
just
it is.
To be clear.
Who knows? Just to be clear.
Yeah.
Maybe we should go back to history too. I mean, anyway, I don't know. Okay, well, I'm fine to read the influenza book if you want to do that.
No, let's do Judith Butler. Let's do Gender Trouble.
Okay. What is the penis?
Exactly. The conceptual penis.
Yes. Okay.
That's right.
Anything else to
right.
say about Chalmers?
No.
Nothing.
Good riddance.
Wow.